I'm Mara Whitfield, 31 years old, and I never thought my own blood would try to take everything I built from the wreckage they left me in. 6 years of silence. 6 years where they didn't send a Christmas card or ask if I was alive. Then one Tuesday in October, I came home from a 4-day conference and found my father's truck parked in my driveway like he owned the place. My mother had already rearranged my living room. My brother was eating leftovers out of my refrigerator. And when my father looked at me standing in my own doorway, suitcase still in my hand, he said the words I'll never forget. "You don't have a family of your own, Mara. You've got too much house for one person. We're moving in, and that's the end of it." I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I set my suitcase down, walked back out to the porch, and dialed 3 numbers. If you're here, do me a favor and drop a comment with where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Stay with me, because what I learned that day about family and about myself is something I think a lot of you already know in your bones. I grew up in a town called Mill Hollow, about 40 minutes outside Cincinnati. The kind of town where everyone's cousin knew your cousin and gossip moved faster than the mail. My father, Curtis, ran a small accounting firm out of a strip mall next to a dry cleaner. My mother, Bonnie, taught 4th grade at the same elementary school she'd attended as a child. And then there was my older brother, Trent, 4 years older than me, who could do no wrong from the minute he was born. I'm not exaggerating. I have baby pictures where my mother is holding Trent and looking at him like he hung the moon, and pictures of me as a toddler, where she's looking past the camera at something else entirely. I used to study those photos when I was a teenager, trying to figure out what I'd done wrong before I could even walk. Trent was the kind of kid who broke things and got praised for his curiosity. I was the kind of kid who made straight A's and got told not to brag about it. When he was 16 and totaled the family minivan trying to impress his friends, my father drove him to the dealership the next morning and co-signed on a used Mustang. When I was 16 and asked if I could take driver's ed, my mother told me I should focus on saving up for my own car if I wanted one that badly, so I did. I got a job bussing tables at a barbecue place off the highway, working Friday and Saturday nights and Sunday afternoons. I came home smelling like smoked brisket and bleach. My brother got a college fund. I got a folder of community college brochures my father set on my bed one night without saying a word. The only person in that family who actually saw me was my grandmother, my dad's mom. We called her Nana Joelle. She lived about an hour away in a brick house with a wraparound porch and the most stubborn rose bushes I've ever seen. Every summer, from the time I was about 7 until I went off to college, I spent 2 weeks with her while Trent went to baseball camps and leadership retreats my parents paid for. Those 2 weeks were the only time of the year I felt like the main character in my own life. Nana Joelle would let me stay up late watching old movies. She taught me how to bake biscuits from scratch and how to drive a stick shift on the dirt road behind her property. She told me more than once, "Mara, the world is going to try to make you small. Don't you let it. You take up the space God gave you." I went to community college for 2 years and then transferred to a state school on scholarships and a part-time job at a print shop. I majored in marketing because I was practical and I figured I could always find work. My parents didn't come to my graduation. They were in Florida for a cousin's wedding that weekend. My mother called me Sunday night to ask how the ceremony was, like I'd just gone to a Tuesday yoga class. Nana Joelle drove 3 hours to be there. She gave me an envelope with $500 in it and a card that said, "I'm so proud of you, my girl. Now go build something they can't take from you." I cried in her car for 10 minutes before I could pull myself together. After graduation, I moved to a city about 2 hours from home and got a job at a mid-sized marketing agency. I was good at it. Not just decent, actually good. Within 3 years, I was managing accounts, leading client pitches, taking on bigger projects than most people my age. I had a 1-bedroom apartment with a view of the river and a savings account I was actually proud of. And then, in early 2020, the agency lost 3 of its biggest clients in a single quarter, and they did rolling layoffs. By June, I was unemployed. My severance was burning through faster than I expected, and the freelance work I'd been trying to scrape together wasn't covering rent. By August, I was officially out of money. My landlord gave me until the end of the month to vacate. I sold most of my furniture on Facebook Marketplace, packed what I could fit into my 2009 Toyota Corolla, and drove the 2 hours back to Mill Hollow on a Wednesday afternoon with my last $50 in cash. I hadn't told my parents I was coming. I hadn't told them I'd lost my job either. I was 26 years old and I had no idea where else to go. I pulled up to my parents' house around 6 in the evening. The porch light was on. My father's truck was in the driveway. I sat in my car for almost 20 minutes trying to figure out what I was going to say. I finally walked up to the door and knocked. My mother answered, and the look on her face when she saw me wasn't surprise. It was annoyance. "Mara, what are you doing here?" I told them everything in the kitchen, standing up because nobody offered me a seat. The layoffs. The apartment. The fact that I had eaten one meal in the last 24 hours and was running on coffee from a gas station. I asked, and I'll never forget how my voice sounded saying it, if I could stay with them for a few weeks while I got back on my feet. My father was standing at the counter with his arms crossed. He let me finish and then he shook his head. "Mara, we warned you about that field. We told you marketing was a fluff career. You wanted to do your own thing, and now your own thing isn't working. That's life. You're an adult. You figure it out." My mother just stood there next to him, looking at the floor. I asked her, almost begging, if she'd at least let me sleep on the couch for a few nights. She said, and I am quoting her exactly, "Your father's right, honey. You made your choices. We can't bail you out of every mistake." I asked about Trent. He was 30 at the time, living in Columbus, doing some kind of sales job. I asked if maybe he had a spare room. My father laughed. He actually laughed. He said, "Your brother is building his life. He doesn't need you complicating it." And then my mother walked over to the door and opened it. Not a word. Just opened it and stood there waiting. I drove around Mill Hollow for 2 hours that night before I parked at a Walmart and slept in my car for the first time. I cried until I couldn't breathe, and then I cried some more. Around 3 in the morning, I got out and walked the aisles just to feel like a person in a place. I bought a granola bar with the change in my cup holder. I sat on the curb outside and watched the sky turn gray, and I made myself one promise. I was never, ever going to ask them for anything again. I lived in my car for almost 3 months. I won't pretend it was noble or that it built character. It was awful. I showered at truck stops and 24-hour gyms when I could afford the day pass. I ate from dollar menus. I sent out resumes from coffee shop Wi-Fi and parked overnight at different lots so I wouldn't get hassled. I dropped 15 pounds I didn't have to lose. I stopped looking in mirrors because I didn't recognize the woman looking back. In late October, I drove the hour to Nana Joelle's house. I hadn't told her any of it. I'd been calling her every Sunday like always and pretending everything was fine because I didn't want her to worry. But I was at the end of myself, and she was the only person on earth I had left. When she opened the door and saw me, she didn't ask a single question. She pulled me inside, sat me at her kitchen table, and put a plate of leftover pot roast in front of me. I ate it like an animal. And when I was finished, she sat down across from me, put her hand over mine, and said, "Tell me everything." I told her. All of it. The layoffs, the car, the night my parents shut the door. She listened without interrupting once. When I finished, her eyes were wet, but her voice was steel. She said, "You're staying here. You're staying as long as you need, and I'm going to have words with my son." I stayed with Nana Joelle for almost a year. I slept in her guest room, the one with the yellow curtains and the quilt her mother had made. I helped her with the garden. I drove her to her doctor's appointments. I cooked dinner most nights, and we watched her favorite old shows together. And in that quiet, safe little house, I started rebuilding. I found freelance work, then a remote contract with a digital agency out of Chicago. Within 8 months, I was making more than I had at my old job. And I was saving almost every dollar of it because Nana Joelle wouldn't take rent from me no matter how many times I tried. She never told me what she said to my father. She just told me he knows what he did, and he knows what I think of it. I never heard from my parents during that year. Not a single call. Not a text. They knew where I was and they stayed away. I told myself I didn't care, but I cried about it more times than I can count. I'd been at Nana Joelle's for about 10 months when she got sick. It came on fast. She'd had a cough that wouldn't go away, and by the time the doctors caught what it was already past the point of fighting. She was 83 years old and she made her own choices. She refused aggressive treatment. She said she wanted to be at home, in her own bed, with her garden out the window. So that's what we did. I took care of her for 6 weeks. I won't go into the details of those weeks. They belonged to me and her and nobody else. But I will say that on her second to last day, when she was lucid and clear-eyed, she had me bring her the lockbox from her closet. Inside was an envelope with my name on it and a key, and a letter from her attorney. "This house is yours, Mara. Everything in it, the land too. I changed the will 3 years ago, after the way they treated you at your graduation. I just hadn't found the right time to tell you." I tried to argue. I told her my father would lose his mind. She looked at me with that steel back in her voice and said, "Let him. You earned this house with your love. He hasn't set foot in it in 6 years." She passed 2 days later, in the morning, with the light coming through the yellow curtains and my hand in hers. The funeral was a disaster. My parents showed up. So did Trent, with some girlfriend I'd never met. My father made a scene at the wake, accusing me of manipulating his mother, telling everyone within earshot that I'd isolated her and taken advantage. My mother wouldn't look at me. Trent told me in the parking lot that I didn't deserve the house and that if I had any decency I'd sell it and split the money 3 ways. I told him to go to hell. I drove back to Nana Joelle's house that night and changed every lock on the property before the sun came up. The next 6 years of my life were the best I'd ever had. I made the house mine, slowly and carefully. I kept the wraparound porch. I kept the roses. I painted the kitchen the color of a robin's egg because she'd always said she would if she ever got around to it. I built a home office in what had been her sewing room and grew my freelance work into a real business. By year 3, I had 3 contractors working under me. By year 5, I'd incorporated and was billing 6 figures a year. I met a man named Quentin at a small business mixer downtown. He owned a hardware store he'd inherited from his father, and he was the kindest person I'd ever known. We dated for 2 years. We got engaged on the porch swing. I had a life. A real one. One I built brick by brick, alone for most of it, and I was finally proud of myself. I didn't hear from my family the whole time, not once. I told myself I made peace with it. Mostly I had. And then, last spring, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. I stared at her name on my phone for 3 rings before I picked up out of sheer curiosity. Her voice was different than I remembered, smaller. She said she'd been thinking about me, that she'd seen something online about my company and was proud of what I'd built, that she missed me. I didn't know what to say. I said something non-committal and got off the phone as fast as I could, but she called again the next week, and again the week after that. She never asked for anything. She just wanted to talk. I'm not going to lie to you, a part of me wanted to believe her. A part of me, the part that was still 8 years old and waiting for my mother to look at me the way she looked at Trent, wanted it to be real. So when she asked in early summer if she and my father could come visit, I said yes. I told myself I was strong enough now. I told myself I could control the situation. I had Quentin. I had my own home. I had nothing to lose. They came in July. They were polite. My father didn't apologize exactly, but he said, "Your grandmother would have wanted us to fix this enough times that I almost believed he meant it." My mother cried at the kitchen table. Trent didn't come, but he sent a text saying he hoped I was doing well. I made them lunch. I gave them a tour of the house. I noticed my father looking at everything with a strange focus, like he was taking inventory, but I told myself I was being paranoid. They came again 2 weeks later, and again the week after. By the end of August, they were visiting once a week, sometimes twice. My mother started bringing up how cramped their house had become since my father had to scale back the firm. She mentioned, more than once, how much space I had, how many bedrooms were sitting empty. My father started asking questions about my mortgage, about the property taxes, about whether I'd had the foundation inspected lately. Quentin noticed before I did. He told me one night after they left, "Honey, they're casing your house. Watch them." I should have listened. I want to tell you I did, but I didn't. I wanted so badly to believe my mother had really changed that I let myself ignore what was right in front of me. In late September, I had a 4-day conference in Nashville. A big one. I'd been preparing for months. Quentin was driving down to meet me there for the last 2 days so we could turn it into a long weekend. I mentioned the trip to my mother on the phone the week before. I told her exactly when I was leaving and when I was coming back. I gave her the dates without thinking twice. Because that's what you do when you're trying to be a family, right? You share your calendar. I left on a Friday morning. The conference was great. Quentin showed up Sunday night. We had dinner at a place with live music and we talked about the wedding. On Tuesday morning, my next-door neighbor, a retired postal worker named Eunice, called my cell phone. Her voice was tight. "Mara, honey, I don't want to alarm you, but I saw your dad's truck pull up to your place Sunday evening. They've been there since. There's a U-Haul in the driveway now. Are they helping with something?" I felt the blood leave my face. I told her I was still in Nashville. I told her there was no reason for them to be at my house. She paused for a long time and then said, "Sweetheart, you might want to come home." I checked the security cameras Quentin had installed for me the year before. There were 4 of them, covering the driveway, the front door, the back door, and the side gate. I pulled up the app on my phone and I watched, in real time and recorded, my father using a crowbar on my back door. I watched my mother carry boxes inside. I watched Trent, who I hadn't seen in 7 years, walk up my porch steps with a suitcase like he was coming home from a long trip. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and I shook. Quentin came out of the bathroom and saw my face. I handed him the phone. He looked at the footage. He looked at me. He said, "Call the police, right now." And here's the part where I learned something about myself. I didn't hesitate. I didn't try to call them first. I didn't tell myself it was a family matter. I picked up my phone and I dialed 911. I gave the dispatcher my address. I told her my home had been broken into, that the intruders were still inside, and that I had video evidence I could send immediately. I asked her to please send officers as fast as possible. She said a unit was on the way. She asked me to stay on the line, and I did, while Quentin packed our bags in record time and we checked out of the hotel. The officers arrived at my house within 12 minutes of my call. I was on the phone with the responding sergeant by the time we were on the highway. He told me my father had answered the door and tried to explain that this was a family situation, that they were helping their daughter who lived alone. The sergeant told me my father had grown agitated when the officers asked for proof of residence, and that my mother had started crying and saying I'd given them permission to stay. The sergeant asked me if I'd given anyone permission to enter my home. I said no, absolutely not, and that I had security footage of them breaking the back door lock to get in. He asked me to email it to him. I pulled over at a gas station and did it from the parking lot. By the time Quentin and I crossed into Ohio, the situation at my house had escalated. My father had been arrested for breaking and entering and refused to cooperate. My brother had also been arrested when he tried to physically block officers from removing him from the home. My mother was being held but not charged. The sergeant told me I'd need to come straight to the station when I arrived. I won't pretend the next 48 hours were anything but exhausting and ugly. I sat in a police station for 3 hours giving a statement. I showed them text messages from my mother where she'd asked very specific questions about my travel dates. I showed them photos my brother had posted on his own social media from inside my house, taken the day before. He'd actually posted them with a caption about settling in. Quentin sat next to me through the whole thing, holding my hand under the table. I pressed charges. All of them. Breaking and entering. Trespassing. Property damage from the broken back door. My attorney, who'd helped me with Nana Joelle's estate, walked me through every step. We filed for emergency restraining orders against all 3 of them within 48 hours. The orders were granted within a week. My father called me from the station before I'd even gotten back to the house. He told me I was ruining the family by involving the police. He told me his lawyer was going to tear apart Nana Jewel's will and that I'd see the house wasn't really mine after all. I let him finish, and then I said the only thing I wanted to say to him for the rest of my life. Dad, you shut your door on me when I had nothing. I'm shutting mine on you now that I have everything. We're even. I hung up. I blocked his number. I blocked my mother's number and Trent's number and 3 of my aunt's numbers because I knew they'd be the next ones to call. The legal proceedings took about 4 months. My father and brother both pled down to lesser charges in exchange for accepting permanent restraining orders and paying restitution for the damage to my back door, which I'd already replaced with a steel security door and a smart lock. My mother was never charged, but the restraining order against her was permanent too. My attorney made sure of it. The threat to challenge the will fell apart almost immediately. Nana Jewel's attorney had documented her mental competency at every step of the will revision. He'd had her evaluated by an independent psychologist. He'd kept handwritten notes of every meeting. He'd done it specifically because, as he told me later, "Your grandmother told me she expected your father to try something. She wanted to make sure he couldn't." I had to deal with the fallout for months. Extended family members I hadn't heard from in years suddenly had opinions. An aunt I barely knew called me from a blocked number to call me ungrateful. My mother's sister sent me a long email about forgiveness and how Jesus would want me to take them back. I deleted it. I learned in that period that a lot of people who'd been silent during the years my parents abandoned me suddenly had a lot to say once I refused to forgive them. I learned that silence in the face of injustice is its own kind of betrayal, and I cut a lot of people out of my life without apology. Quentin and I got married last spring. Small ceremony, on the wraparound porch, with about 30 people who had actually shown up for me over the years. Eunice was there. So was my friend from the agency days, and a couple of contractors I'd grown close to, and Nana Jewel's old neighbor who'd known me since I was a child. There were exactly 0 blood relatives on my side. And I have never, not once, missed any of them. 6 months ago, I started something I'd been thinking about for a long time. I converted the small carriage house behind the main property into a guest cottage, and I started a small foundation in Nana Jewel's name. I call it the Jewel Project. It provides emergency housing and a small living stipend for women between 22 and 35 who've been cut off by their families for choosing careers their families didn't approve of. Art, music, trades, anything their parents called unrealistic. The first recipient moved in 3 months ago. She's 24, she'd been sleeping in her car for 2 weeks when my attorney connected us, and she's a textile artist whose parents told her she was a disgrace for not going to law school. She's been at the cottage for 90 days now, and she just sold her first commission piece to a gallery in Cleveland. I sit on the porch some nights, the same porch my grandmother sat on for 50 years, and I think about everything that happened. I think about the night I slept in a Walmart parking lot with 37 cents in my account. I think about my father's voice telling me I was an adult and I needed to figure it out. I think about my mother opening the door for me to leave without saying a word. And then I think about Nana Jewel, sliding a plate of pot roast across her kitchen table and saying, "Tell me everything." I think about the steel in her voice when she said the house was mine. I think about the kind of love that doesn't require you to be useful or successful or convenient. I think about the kind of love I almost didn't believe was real. Family isn't who shares your blood. Family is who answers the door when you knock with nothing. Family is who tells you to take up the space God gave you. Family is who builds you a place to land before you even know you need one. My parents and my brother taught me what family wasn't. My grandmother taught me what it was. And the people I've chosen, and the woman in the cottage learning that her dreams are worth defending, and the man I married on that porch are the family I get to keep. If you've ever had to walk away from blood to save yourself, I want you to know you're not alone. I want you to know it doesn't make you cruel. I want you to know that the door you close to protect yourself is the same door that lets in everyone who actually deserves to know you. And I want you to know that the life you build on the other side of that door can be more beautiful than anything they ever told you was possible. If this story meant something to you tonight, leave a comment and tell me about the family you've chosen. hit that like button and subscribe if you haven't already. There's more where this came from, and I'll see you in the next one. I've thought a lot about how I got here. Sitting on this porch with a wedding ring on my finger and a name on a foundation door that belongs to a woman who saved my life. And the more I think about it, the more I realize that nothing in my story was an accident. Every single thing that happened was the harvest of seeds someone planted, including me. My father planted contempt for me when I was a child and watered it for 25 years. When I finally fell, he reaped exactly what he'd grown. He couldn't help me because he'd never bothered to learn how. My mother planted silence every time she watched him be cruel and said nothing. So when I needed her voice the most, she had none. And Trent planted entitlement every day he was told he was better than me. So of course he walked into my house thinking it was already his. None of them were surprised by who they became. They just never expected me to become someone who wouldn't tolerate it anymore. But I planted things too. I planted work when I was 16 and bussing tables on Friday nights. I planted patience every summer I spent on Nana Joelle's porch, listening instead of talking. I planted self-respect every time I sent out another resume from a coffee shop parking lot when it would have been easier to give up. And when the time came to defend my home, I had something my father didn't expect. I had the strength. I'd built one quiet decision at a time, for years when no one was watching. The thing I want you to take from this, more than anything, is that character isn't something you find in a crisis. It's something you build before the crisis comes, so it's there when you need it. My grandmother knew that. She told me to take up space long before I understood why I'd need to. She wasn't preparing me for comfort. She was preparing me for the day I'd have to stand alone in my own kitchen and say no to the people who made me. I also want you to know that walking away from people who hurt you isn't cruelty. It's clarity. For years, I confused loyalty with endurance, and I let people who didn't love me set the terms of my life. The day I called 911 on my own father wasn't the day I lost my family. It was the day I stopped pretending I had one with them. I'd already had a real family for a long time. I just needed the courage to admit it. If you're somewhere in the middle of your own version of this story, I want you to do one thing for me. Plant something today, a small skill, a quiet boundary, a friendship with someone who's actually kind to you. Don't wait until you need it. Plant it now, while it's still just a seed and nobody's paying attention. Because one day the storm is going to come, and what you've grown is what you'll have to stand under. I built a life out of what they threw away. So can you.